LegalizeFreedom.com. Why are we here? Where do we come from? Where are we going? From the nature of reality to the future of humanity. Beyond politics, poverty and war. LegalizeFreedom.com.
Greetings and welcome once again to LegalizeFreedom.com. I'm your host Greg Moffat, and my guest today is Randy Rogers, who joins us to discuss his book, The Key of Life, a Metaphysical Investigation. In just about everyone's life, there comes a time when they may question their reason for existing. For Randy Rogers, that journey began one day in June of 1995, as he began a metaphysical quest along a cryptic path that at times caused him to question his own sanity. The emotional ride that developed threatened to tear apart everything he had worked so hard to accomplish, and the only thing sustaining him was an undying belief that events would unfold to prove that he was on the right course. It's a true story about who we are, why we're here, and how we're all connected. A tale of past lives, present circumstances, synchronicity, and reincarnation. It may inspire you to interpret the synchronicities in your own life, experience the extraordinary, and unlock the meaning of life, past, present, and future. Hello and welcome, Randy, and thank you so much for joining us today on LegalizeFreedom.com.
Well, you're welcome, Greg. It's a pleasure to be here.
Today, Randy, we're going to talk a little bit about, well, a lot actually, about your book, The Key of Life. Before we dive into that, just tell folks a little bit about your background and career, because it's very interesting in itself. And then how, I mean, this would be the backbone of the main interview, but just briefly how you became interested in the subject that your book is all about.
Sure. Well, my background is I was always a photographer. From the time I was 10, I had gotten a camera for my 10th birthday, and I just knew I was a photographer. It was something I knew about myself, and all through high school, and then I worked for the newspaper when I was in high school, and then I went into television. They owned a TV station in town, and spent a couple years there, and then moved out to Phoenix and 13 years there. And then the network hired me, NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw and that. I was working with them, and I spent 20 years in the television news business, and by the time the 90s rolled around, it was becoming too tabloid for me, and I decided, well, if I'm going to make stuff up, you might as well go into the movies, and that's what they were doing in news, and I wanted out of it. And so I went into motion picture promotion and commercials and television shows, and it kind of fell into this one big job that we ended up doing with the studios was promotion for the movies, and we were doing what was called press junkets, and that went on for 20 years of that part of my life, and somewhere towards the last halfway through or 3/4 through that business, that's when I started to realize that things were happening in my life that weren't an accident, and I started to take notes of it. I was having dreams in particular about a person that I had gone to grade school with, and I started keeping track of this. So the newsman in me never had left me. I always had a notebook and pen and paper with me, and I kept all these notes of what was going on, and that's where I started to stray into this understanding and trying to understand this metaphysical part of life.
Yeah, now this involves this character, Kathy. These dreams that you were having increasingly caused you to begin to question pretty much everything about what you thought you knew about how life is and how the universe works. In investigating this for yourself, trying to work out what was happening, you mentioned your newsman's instinct. And when I was reading the book, I thought, well, there's a strong correlation here between journalistic corroborating of evidence and, the synchronicities that you were experiencing. That is to say, you went out about this methodically to figure out what was going on and to keep track of what, you didn't dismiss it. I think synchronicities I've done a couple of shows on these, is something that happens to everyone all the time, but people are generally not paying attention, but you couldn't ignore what was happening to you.
Oh, that's exactly right. You hit the nail on the head there, that it's happening to everyone all the time and people aren't paying attention. But I was paying attention because I had this like I said, this news background where I noticed things that were just seemed too much of a coincidence, because that was the way I was trained. Because when you're out following a story or following leads and trying to understand what's happening, you remember everything that somebody's telling you, and then all of a sudden, oh man, I remember this person said this and this happened, and let's check that line of it, and that's what would happen with me. And because I wasn't raised with any of this metaphysical background. I had no knowledge of, I didn't even know what the word meant or any of these things, synchronicity, any of it. I was raised in a Roman Catholic family. I had been an altar boy and all, and I kind of lost that along the way after I got married and went through a divorce. That kind of shook me away from my religious background, but I still wasn't really following any kind of beliefs or teachings. In fact, I didn't even believe in anything. I tell people I only searched for the truth. And that's what I was looking for when I started down this path. I started examining what was true and what wasn't, and I did go about it very methodically.
What was the significance then, just to put a bit more flesh on bones for folks here, of this person that you were having dreams about, and what were the first few, how can I put it, what were the first few episodes like?
Sure. Well, her name was Kathy Lynch, and it was a girl I'd gone to grade school with in this Catholic Sacred Heart School back in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, Conemaugh, Pennsylvania, actually. It was a little town that we were in. And she was coming to me in thoughts. It happened after I moved into this new home, and I hadn't thought about her for a while, but all of a sudden I just had this overwhelming thought that she had passed away, and I didn't know why I was thinking that, but I tried to push it away, and that's where my book starts off, is with these thoughts. And then it turned into an obsession. For a year I started looking to see if I could find her without telling anyone I was having these thoughts about her, and then it culminated with a huge dream that took me into Palm Springs and talking with people, and they're trying to tell me that she passed away peacefully in her sleep, but in the background I could still hear her calling out to me, no, find out what happened, and you got to find out these things. And I had to tell these certain girls that she went to school with, and I hadn't thought of any of these people, but it was so powerful that it woke me up that night, and I got up and I wrote the dream down, and I had never done that. And then I went back to bed, and that's when I had what I would call my first out-of-body experience, which I didn't even know what that was, but I found myself floating above the bed after I'd gotten into bed, and I was just relaxing. I wasn't quite asleep. I was in that twilight state, and I felt myself floating up and looking down, and I could feel her presence with me. And that's when she started telling me about that she hadn't really died, that you don't really die, you just move on to this other dimension of space and time. And in fact, there is no space and time there. It's just a dimension that we dwell in, and that our soul dwells in, and she's trying to explain this to me, and I wrote down these last words where she was saying, feel my spirit is what makes us as one, and this whole time I was just floating and not wanting to go back into my body, getting higher and higher, and finally I settled back down in, and I knew something. At that point is when I knew something was happening, because I thought, well, I'm either losing my mind or I've got to find out. And that's when I made a call to my mother the next day and told her what was happening and had her try to find this girl for me.
The out-of-body experience, now, I've spoken to many people about this, and for some, particularly when they've never read anything about it before, they don't know anything about the phenomenon, it's absolutely terrifying. They think they're dying, similar things like that, or as you say, losing their mind. Although that was a very profound experience, did you find it frightening?
Well, no, because it felt so good. But normally, I had this happen once before briefly when I was in a bureau working out in Mason. I was relaxing one day in my chair, and I was looking up, and I found myself starting to pull away from my body and see myself from another perspective. And it was so startling that I stopped. I was like, it did scare you a second, because I thought, oh my God, I'm not in my body, and I came back down to it immediately. And then I was trying to do it, and I couldn't figure out how to make that happen again. And I never thought about it. I never really thought, oh, I must have been dreaming or whatever. But this time, that night when it happened, it felt so good that I didn't want to go back in, because being with her and floating up there, the energy that was surrounding me was just incredible. It was like this warm bath of water flowing over you that was an emotion of love that was just flowing through you, and it was so soothing that you didn't really care about the fact that you left your body. In fact, I just thought, well, I could just go off right now and I'd be fine with it.
You had that earlier experience that you spoke about. Generally speaking, prior to this, in your earlier phase of your life, did you have any particular interest in the paranormal, supernatural, psychic phenomena, anything like that?
No, not really. I didn't find it a subject that well, first of all, in Catholic school, all that stuff was not, even on the table and for discussion. And we never even, because we're talking back in the 60s, early 60s, and I just didn't have any knowledge of it. I didn't even have a knowledge that there was religions that believed in past lives and reincarnation. And I didn't know any of these things. I was oblivious to it. I just kind of left out into the world as this guy that didn't really know much at all about the other belief systems or things that there could be finding truth in. And so when I started on this, I started from, like I said, the perspective of a news person, and so I started keeping notes and what happened, and that's what was important to me, was the timeline of the way events happened. I'd write down what happened, what I had in the dream, what I saw, what was told to me, or things like that. And then later, when I would get reinforcement of this did occur and this happened, especially with Kathy, that these, that she was, that I did find her then eventually. I mean, when my mom found her, and that's what was shocking, was how accurate my, the things that were happening with me were. That's what blew me away, was how accurate how can I pull this stuff out of thin air, it seemed like to me. But then I started to realize it wasn't really thin air even.
Yeah, that's one of the most startling things about your account, really, is that you're gathering information in the dream space that you couldn't know about, but then it verifies, it checks out, so to speak, in the real world. Well, I say real world, as soon as I hear myself say that, then it's
yeah, right.
Which one is it? But that in itself is reminiscent of some psychic phenomena. People who remote view get information about people in places they couldn't possibly know. Other psychic phenomena. So I'm not saying there's any direct correlation necessarily, but these things all overlap, and it's remarkable how many similarities there are when you start to investigate.
Oh, right. I tell people that the word psychic, everyone's psychic. It's just a matter whether you decide to use these powers that you have, and not even powers. It's just the natural ability that we've kind of lost along the way. I tell people that we used to, when we were indigenous people and Native Americans and just natives around the world, that's what we really relied on back in the day, that we've relied on our feelings and reading things within signs that were around us. There's these signs that happen all day long, showing you what's going to occur, this is going to happen. If you know how to read them, you become, people go, oh, well, you're psychic. How did you know to say that? And then that happened. Well, I do it all the time, and it's going with your feelings. It's using your feelings instead of thinking things through. You kind of feel your way through life.
It's interesting you mentioned the Catholic upbringing in Catholic school, and the fact that any Eastern traditions or just other belief systems would kind of be off the discussion table. Because of course, I'm not Catholic, but I grew up with some friends who were, well, they weren't really Catholic, but they were kind of shoehorned into it, by their parents saying, you are Catholic now,
right.
like it or not. And they have their own ideas about life after death and heaven and hell and all the rest of it. I mean, if they misbehaved, they were told that they'd go to hell. Now, whether that has any meaning in the metaphysical realm, whether it overlaps into anything that's an actual phenomenon, it doesn't matter. But the Catholic Church has its own ideas that are profoundly metaphysical.
Oh, well, the only problem with the Catholic Church and every other church out there is they all rely on what is a belief system. And you have to just, on a blank slate, believe this. They tell you this is this, and this is the way it is, and you have to believe it. There's no proof. There's no truth in it. There's no searching for the truth. It's all about having a deep, deep faith in something. And that just flew in the face of being a newsman, because if you did that, you'd be telling all kinds of stories on the air that aren't true. And that's why I got out of the news business, because that's the way it's going now. But back when I was in it, it wasn't that way. You searched for the truth, and you got solid stories from a lot of more than one witness and more than one verification. You had to have backup upon backup to make sure that this is what exactly occurred. And so that's how I approached this thing in searching it out, trying to find and keep a detailed record. It was keeping that journal that ended up becoming the book. And I wrote in it every night what happened that day. And sometimes as it was happening, I'd be writing down times and dates. And so the book is full of all those, that data. That's what a lot of people find, the synchronicity of a date I wrote that means something in their life. And the whole world is synchronous. We're all connected. And that's really, didn't realize that that's what I was looking for. It was a story about who we are, why we're here, and how we're all connected.
Yeah, I think my favorite, just as a little aside, my favorite tabloid newspaper headline from the 1980s here in the UK was Hitler found on the moon.
Yeah,
this was. I don't think that was ever borne out. I often wondered if it gave birth to the movies Iron Sky, which are absolutely nuts about the Nazis setting up a base on the moon. But anyway, that's another discussion. But you talk about this methodical way of going about looking into what was going on with you in your life. Well, this is being borne out as we speak, left, right, and centre, because there are many people looking into some of these phenomena and doing it in a scientific way. There are scientific studies and people doing serious research, but unlike the sort of hard physical science, it can be difficult to repeat. The results can vary. It can be very subjective, but that doesn't mean that there isn't something actually happening.
No, it doesn't mean that there isn't something happening, but I'll tell you, I've read and I've met and talked with scientists about certain phenomenon that have happened to me that I went and said, oh, this can't be that, because I've been a photographer all my life. And the one I'm talking about right now in particular was these orbs that people get on their photos. I didn't even know what they were, but I just knew a lot of people were, oh, these are spirit orbs and this is spirit. And I'm thinking, yeah, right. That's dust on your lens, and it has this, effect that it blows up and you can't tell what it is, but that's actually just some kind of defect. And that was my thoughts on the subject of these orbs for so long, until I had a man, and I wrote about it on my website. People can go to my website at randolphrogers.com and read these stories. But I wrote about what happened to me one day when this man called me up, and there was synchronicities about our stories, and he wanted to send me these pictures of these orbs, and I was ready to right away tell him, look, it's probably just dust. And I said, well, send them to me. And I started investigating it, and I realized this was something other than dust on his camera. And not only that, I started hearing from my own mother saying, well, look at these pictures that you have. And I started going back through my own photos and found these orb balls of light within the photo that have no explanation. They aren't dust. They aren't anything other than something metaphysical that I understood at the time what it was. That now I know completely what it was. And these were two mainstream scientists that had worked with NASA, and I spoke with them. They wrote a book called The Orb Project, and so they really investigated this. They repeated it multiple times, and they determined how it was happening. And so it was, when you want to read some really good scientific studying on this process, and not only that, it's still going on right now. They got the CERN, the collider over in Switzerland, working on this project, and these things that they're trying to determine that there are other dimensions and other worlds, and that's all being pursued by mainstream scientists now. And it will all come full circle. Then it will understand more about how people are able to do certain things that seem amazing and but sometimes aren't repeatable. I mean, You're going to have it flow through you when it's going to flow through you, and it's not like you can just turn it on and turn it off sometimes. It just happens when it's going to happen.
This reminds me of an interesting incident that occurred, again, probably quite mundane, but it certainly made me think. Earlier in the year, I was in Iceland, and we didn't go to see the Northern Lights, but they just appeared one night when we were outside. It was quite amazing. Mm-hmm. And a photographer who was with me took some, very, very good equipment, good guy, knew what he was doing. He took some photographs. I took some photographs on my phone camera, and not only were the results on my phone camera different to the ones he got, what we saw with the naked eye was not what his camera captured. And we had a conversation about this, and he was saying, well, the camera can capture many more, perceive many more colours than the human eye. And I said, oh, I wasn't aware of that. I guess different cameras are different. But the point is, a camera isn't a human eye. So it's not surprising sometimes that things turn up in photographs.
Oh, yeah. Well, that, I believe me, I've studied, because my background is as a photographer, I've studied so much stuff about what a camera can capture and what certain cameras can capture, because there are certain cameras that are designed to capture in films, back in the day of film, but now it's just the camera and the device that's capturing it. And there's a couple of different devices. There's a CCD device, which was the original, that stood for charged couple device, and that was the imaging sensor on the camera. And then they got the CMOS sensor now, CMOS, and it's a different kind of sensor. And each one of them have different characteristics about them. And these scientists studied that when they were studying the orbs, and they found out that the CCD cameras went into a range of light that was different, that went further into this one range of the light spectrum that allowed these orbs to appear within. And you wouldn't catch it on one camera as easily as the other, although you could capture it on either camera depending on how much these orbs would charge up with their energy. So it was fascinating stuff, and it really made a lot of sense, because the orbs I captured on a CMOS camera, which by all means is the most difficult one to capture it with. Now, not only have I captured them on camera, I've seen them with my own eyes in a couple of times, and that's really rare to see, but it does happen, and people do see it. And what I described was exactly what was going on in the room, because I had verification later from the person I was doing this. I was doing a regression with, and what was happening in there and what I was seeing and what she was describing were matching up perfectly. And I mean, I was an observer, that I was a trained observer too, watching this. So it was like, what the heck was that ball of blue light that I just saw circle and go down behind this person? To see it in real life is incredible. But I'm not the only one that's seen it. It depends on how much these energies, these orbs, these spirits want to charge, that they charge up, how much energy is brought into the room, and studying or reading what these scientists have written about it was fascinating, because they went and they tested everything, every aspect of it, and they came away with the conclusion that this stuff is unexplainable as far as it is something metaphysical happening.
Well, we know that different types of animals see and hear different spectrums of sound and light in comparison to human beings, generally larger spectrums. And there is sound and light beyond our senses. And, of course, how can I put it? Stuff exists at those ends of the spectrum. It's not just our little narrow band. I loved Aldous Huxley's idea, about our senses being deliberately limited so that we're not overwhelmed.
Oh, that's true. When we come into this life, we're not only are our senses limited, but it's so that we stay in this dimension, in this character. We have blinders on. We don't remember. When we haven't even gone into the whole conscious and subconscious levels that we're talking about here, because that's whenever I was into these as we go to talk about the story more here, as I followed these synchronicities in my life, and that's how I investigated the story. I let the synchronicities take me to these places, and then I tried to understand what was happening when I got there to these, and the synchronicities in my life led me to this Russian acupuncturist that put these needles in me, and I was open to that. I thought, well, I've never had acupuncture, and I'll let her put needles in me and see what and I started telling her who I was, who she was, how we were connected in these past lives, and I had no knowledge of even what I was saying, but I was just going on about what was coming through to me, and then I started to research it and find out that what I was telling her was the truth, that there were these events occurred and these places existed that I spoke of in detail.
Yeah, it's really almost like a treasure hunt, your description of going from one synchronicity to another, because it's just like, you're almost like a pinball, just going from pin to pin, but you're being steered. It's not random.
Oh, everyone's being steered. I tell people that. You're being steered all day long, whether you know it or not. Everybody thinks that they're in control of their life, but in reality, there's a script been handed to you. You're here to play a character in a role that you're here to play, and how much energy you want to put into that character is what, that's up to you, and that's the spirit that drives you. That's who's really inside of Greg Moffat, and that's who's inside of Randy Rogers, are these these balls of energy. That's the driving the character. And how much the people that are not afraid to gamble at all, they're the biggest winners. You'll see all these people that go out there and make a big name for themselves. You've got just a drive in that person that people recognize right away, that they're not afraid to roll the dice and put it all on number 7. Well, what if you lose? There is no losing in life. The only loss is if you don't put everything into the character you're playing. And so don't be afraid. Go out there and give it your best.
Yeah, this idea of that I mentioned earlier about, were you afraid or at any time during the body experience? It sounded like obviously you were fascinated, intrigued, and kept awake at night by what was happening, but it sounded like you enjoyed, certainly that's what comes across in your writing, that you actually enjoyed this process of discovery. And I think for a lot of people who, again, don't know about synchronicity and maybe aren't looking for them, when something does happen in their life that's kind of a whoa moment, what's going on here, they don't actually like it, because it can really shake them up, because what we've been taught to believe about the world says that, there's only coincidences, there's no synchronicity, there's no, unseen dance going on here. So I think a lot of people would be quite unsettled by it. Personally, yeah. I love synchronicity. I laugh out loud, even if it's really strange.
Right. Well, that's because you're a person that searches out the truth. And you mentioned it just in your little statement there that we have this belief. Well, that's what you butt up against every time, is the belief. If you let go of your belief system, all this stuff will just start to flow through you so much easier. But you got to let go of beliefs. You got to quit believing things, and you got to find the truth and know what the truth is. When I talk about things that happen in my life, I know it's the truth. I tell people, do not believe me. I don't want you to believe me. I want you to go out and find a truth on your own. Go out and experience this. Go out and try these things and see what happens. And then you'll have your own truth, because my truth isn't your truth. It's your, but you'll find a similarity. You'll find a synchronicity between us then. This connection. And then you'll start to understand, this is happening to me. This is the way my life is going. It's gone this way for a reason. There's nothing bad that happens in your life. Even the worst thing that happened is designed to push you onto a path to continue to achieve more and to move in the direction you want. If people get up to this crossroads in their life and they have to go left or right and they worry about that decision, I tell people, don't worry about it. Just flip a coin if you can't make up your mind. If you're one of those people that's so indecisive, just flip a coin and stick with it. If you're going down the wrong path, if you made a right and you were supposed to make a left, it will push you back over there. There'll be things that just put up roadblocks and move you, and you'll go, okay, I got to go this way. Always. I tell people, I jumped into the river of life and I just went with the river. I didn't swim upstream, cross stream, I just went where it took me. And it's taken me on the most amazing journey that you can imagine. I love everywhere I've been, and it's been an exciting adventure, and there's way more to come.
A phrase I use when it comes to synchronicity is the more you look, the more you see. And I think, referring to what I said earlier on about letting it into your conscious awareness, and then it starts to reveal itself. I mean, the first book I read on synchronicity, I knew the expression and I knew roughly what it was. And I read this first book and I finished off reading it while I was in a coffee shop, and I thought, oh wow, this sounds really fascinating. And I started to think maybe had things happened earlier in my life that would fall into this category. And I walked out the door of the coffee shop, put the book down, closed it, walked out the door, and right straight in front of me was a huge billboard advertising a computer game, and in huge letters it said "Ready to Play?" ? Mm-hmm. And that spoke to me as a synchronicity. And then I walked away from that just going, okay, I'm ready to play this game. And then I was listening to a radio show when they were talking about the global elite. I was walking along the pavement just listening to this on headphones. And I was saying, what, I don't like the term elite, because that's meant to be the best of the best. And, some of these dark-suited people, they aren't. And then I stopped to change the program, and I looked up, and there was some roadworks going on, and they said elite road signs, and just little things like that. People, you can dismiss that. It's easy to dismiss because it isn't life-changing. But after that, this started to happen on a regular basis, and sometimes you tune out of it a little bit and that you don't experience it. But if you throw yourself back into it, it starts to happen again. And for me, that was sort of evidence, all the evidence I needed. Yeah.
Oh, no, you're dead on. You are so on. That's why I tell people it's your own life. I can't tell you what your synchronicity is going to be, but it will be like you will recognize it. And the more you recognize it, the more it happens. It just snowballs. It has a snowball effect. And when my book came out, the publisher, my publisher, Ginny Weissman, was with me in Chicago, and she was from Chicago originally. We were there doing pre-publicity stuff on it, and she had moved out to Palm Springs though and was living out there because she didn't like the cold of Chicago. And that morning we were having breakfast in the hotel, and we were going to go to a radio show on WGN radio that afternoon before we were having the breakfast, and I was saying, and it was a cold, frosty October morning, and I said, don't you want to just move back here? And she said, no way. She goes, I wouldn't move back here for anything. She goes, the only way I'd move back to Chicago is if they put those futuristic domes over the city and completely covered it in glass, and they kept it warm, nice and warm all year, and only when it was a nice day that they opened up the glass. And she goes, that's the only way that I would move back here, is if they covered this city in a dome and did that. And she describes in detail how she would like the city to look. And so that day, then a few hours later, we're walking through this shopping mall. We had parked our car in, and we're walking across to the radio station, and my phone rings, and it's my publicist, Sarah, and calling from Virginia, and she said, hey, your radio program just got canceled. Something happened. They had to go on a remote, and they had to cancel the show. They wanted to see if we can book it later or whatever. And I said, yeah, that's fine. And I could see Ginny hearing this news that things had stopped, and she's getting all ramped up and she was really excitable, and she wants to talk to my publicist, and she's dancing around there. And so I hand her the phone here, and she's, well, this isn't good, and we need to do, and I'm just going with the flow. Hey, it's not going to happen. There's a reason. And I look up, and I look up above Ginny's head as she's doing this whole song and dancing. When she gets off the phone, she's all upset. I said, well, Ginny, I said, remember I was telling you about synchronicity? I said, don't worry about it. This is supposed to happen. She goes, well, I said, well, turn around. I said, what were you describing this morning? And I turn her around and look, and right up above her head, there's a photography studio there with all these beautiful pictures of Chicago, and they have this huge photograph of Chicago, an actual photo of Chicago with this futuristic glass dome over the whole city, and it's sitting there, huge on the wall. And I said, what were you describing to me this morning? And I said, so when this happened, it happened right here do you think that's an accident? I said, that's just telling me, hey, you were everything if you let it flow out of you like that, when you're having your conversations and you pay attention to the details, you will see something that happened in that conversation happen later in the day whenever you get to a crossroads in your life. And here was a crossroads where we can get all upset about this, or we can just go with it. And then she relaxed, and I said, yeah, and then more things like that happened to her. And because I was along with her, I could point them out to her. And in fact, the next time she saw it herself and said, look at this. And I said, there you go. Now you're seeing it happen. And it's the same thing. It's a photograph. It's a this. I told you, when we were Native Americans, we just looked at the trees and the leaves and the way the animals moved and did the same thing. And now it's written on bus stops and newspapers and signs with literally the words spelled out for you. And people, they wander through this world every day and don't even realize that if they just looked around, life could flow so much easier for them.
Just to touch upon an area that is kind of part of the core of the book as well, is that when you're on this, it was nothing less than a quest, really.
Right.
It began to take up more and more of your time, and obviously you were trying to balance that with a very busy work schedule, but it also had an impact on your personal life, a very profound one.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, I started to. My wife didn't really. She was playing, the doubting Thomas role, and that was fine too. But and the devil's advocate kind of thing going on, and keeping you. That made me just search harder for the things, but then it started to become personal, where things that were just not true, that I knew weren't true. Like when I'd go to a party with her, and because once I started to tell people what was happening, and that I was going to see this acupuncturist, and she was putting needles in me, and I was going into these sessions and telling stories about past lives. Every time I'd go to a party, they wanted to know what had happened the previous week. So it was like a running serial that people would flock around me and they'd tell a little story about what happened. And she was getting annoyed with this, and so, but it was all part of the whole thing too, because it just, pushing me one direction and she wanted to go another direction, and you have to go the direction you're supposed to go in life. And I mean, I never look back over my life and go, wow, I wish could have stayed with this or done that. I'm always happy where I am, and I'm ecstatic where I am today, that my life has just led me to this beautiful place I'm living in, and I'm really happy about how things worked out, and everybody should be. I know there are heartbreak at times, because when it comes to leaving someone that you're close to, and it doesn't matter whether it's through death or divorce or just moving to different parts of the world, those seem like dramatic moments, but there's always something better waiting for you that you've got to be open to receiving, and that's the way I've always been.
Well, I mentioned this second point. It's sensitive, but it is in your book, so it's out there.
Oh, sure.
I mean, ultimately, this marriage broke down completely,
right?
Partly or wholly as a result of what you were going through.
Oh yeah. Well, it was definitely triggered by that, but in the long run, it was never meant to be beyond what it was, and it worked for the amount of time that it did. And in fact, I just had a close friend of mine go through the same thing with, and it wasn't because of metaphysical stuff happening with him, but his wife, had an affair and left him, and he was, kind of, and I said, look, I said, I know it seems like it's hurting now and that. I said, but someday you will actually thank her for because you spent this amount of time, and you're having to move to a new level now, and you've got to be open to it and let it happen. And I said, and someday you're going to look back at it and go, God, I couldn't even imagine myself being back in that situation, because it had run its course. Literally, the story has to keep moving forward, and you wrote the story, and as hard as it is to play those dramatic parts, I tell people whenever I worked in Hollywood, and made these movies, I said, if I made a movie about life and put it out there, and it was 2 hours long, and all it was a man and a woman walking through a field holding hands and beautiful music playing, and nothing really happened, but they were just in love, and there was no drama, nothing bad happened. It was just music and enjoying the scenery. Would you come see that movie? Well, of course not. There's no action. There's no this. I said, that's because in real life, we want all these things. We have death and destruction and action, and, and everybody gets all upset about it. But in reality, it's the way we want our lives to go, because that's where the excitement and the drama comes from.
Well, in our current incarnation as a species, we've sort of evolved into, but also being trained by those who've come before us, telling us how things are and how they're not, to basically make life very often about avoiding what we don't want rather than reaching for what we do want. So, and this will often manifest itself in someone in a relationship or in a job worrying about what might be beyond that, so they put up with it, basically. It's about tolerating things rather than looking beyond that. But as you say, it's, roll the dice, because that's what the game is about, and it is on one level a game, really.
Oh, yeah. And, well, that tolerating things, I understand that aspect of it too, because I've done that in my life, where you just put up with something and you think it's going to get better, but it's not going to get better, because it's trying to tell you it's time for that to move to a new direction. And so you've got to not be, it takes a brave person to continue moving forward in this life and just not be afraid of failures, because they aren't really, I never view them as failures. They were just stepping stones along the way. Every one of them, when I wrote my book, I started saying, well, that's why I was with this person, and that's why this happened, because they taught me that in my life. And then once that lesson's learned, it's all about in the end, it's all about karmic lessons that you inflict on yourself. Karma isn't something that's being done to you. It's something you're doing to yourself. You came into this life and you're challenging yourself with these lessons. And so how you perceive and react to those lessons is what's key. If you don't act the right way, you're going to keep getting hit over the head with that karmic hammer. It's just the same thing's going to keep happening to you over and over. That's repeat karma, that happens to most people out there, that until they figure out, I got to respond to this differently. And the minute you do, and then the karmic lesson dissipates, you go on to the next one.
The acupuncture sessions that you mentioned is one of the most interesting threads that runs throughout the book, and you did many of these, and some of them just sounded absolutely wild, the experiences you were having. But what was briefly, because I don't know much about acupuncture, but what was the connection between that and the experiences you were having? Because, I think, was it just the result of, sort of spontaneous result of the sessions, or was it some special practice that she had that was designed to be more than regular acupuncture?
Well, it wasn't designed to be more than regular acupuncture, but it was a special place that she put the needles in these 4 spots the combination of where the needles were and then the state that it puts you into, because people don't even realize acupuncture is the same as hypnosis, really, in the fact that, except that it's opening up meridians too. But it does a little more than hypnosis does in that respect. But it can put you into that very relaxed state, which it should. By all means, when you stick these needles in you, you're supposed to just really chill out and just totally relax. And that's the same thing hypnosis does. And I never followed either one of these modalities and studied them. But once I found out about the acupuncture, and she had found it by accident. I was just on Lucy's radio show not too long ago, and we were discussing how she had found out about it, and I knew the story. She had been training and put these needles into a person who was having these epileptic seizures one day, what they believed to be some kind of epileptic seizures, and here she started going back into these past lives and telling her about that, and then it was helping her with her case. And much like the book that Dr. Brian Weiss wrote, Many Lives, Many Masters. He's a psychologist, and he was using hypnosis to do the same thing. And that book was handed to me along my path here of studying this, and I realized something like that was happening to me. And so whenever the book came out, everybody asked me, well, how did you become a hypnotherapist now from being a photographer? I said, it's all imaging. When the book came out, everyone wanted to experience what happened with me, and to go and get them to this acupuncturist, and she really is, if not the only one of very few in this country that even know how to do this. Most people use hypnosis. And so I studied under Dick Sutphin, the guy that had written 20 books on the subject of past lives and reincarnation and hypnosis, and he trained me to become a hypnotherapist. And so then I could go out, and for the last 5 years, I've been out going around the country doing workshops and private sessions, and that my next book will be about that, about the all these other stories that are out there, and they're fascinating stories, because once you can get into your subconscious mind and realize there's more to you than just this life you're living right now, that it's fascinating what comes out of you and how it's connected to what's happening to you today.
I experienced a past life regression session under hypnosis, and although I wasn't in a deep state of hypnosis, I was still aware of where I was. It was definitely an altered state of consciousness. And I came away from that. It was just absolutely fascinating. I didn't do it for any particular reason other than just to have an experience. But to get downloads of information, images, people, places, events in intense detail, I don't think, could your brain work fast enough to just invent all of that? Particularly when there's details that you would never have thought of. Somebody said, okay, design a past life for yourself.
Well, yeah, I mean, you hit on several things there about hypnosis that people have the wrong impression. They think when you're under hypnosis that you're going to be deep and in a trance and not remember, or you're going to not understand. It's going to feel different. It's not that at all. You're really not even going to know you're under hypnosis. You're going to feel real relaxed. You're going to feel right on the edge of going to sleep, but you're not going to be asleep. You're going to know I'm in the room talking with you. You know you're going to be talking to me, and you're going to not feel anything different, but you're going to have these things start to flow through your mind. And you, like you said, you can't be making them up because it's a story playing out, and you're telling me the story you're seeing. And as the story goes on, I tell people, don't try to judge it or try to understand it right then. Just let it all come out. Just tell me everything you're seeing, what's happening, and we'll talk about it later after we're done, because if you let your conscious mind try to come in, it will pull you out of the subconscious, which is where the story's coming from. So you want to shut the subconscious mind off, and that's what hypnosis is about. Same thing with acupuncture. You're letting go of that chatter in your head that's constantly saying, well, I got to go pick up the dog or take the wife to dinner or do this with the kids or whatever is going on. Your conscious mind is that control freak of your body, and the minute you shut it off, all your subconscious mind's going to come forward, and these unbelievable stories are going to come out about the roles you've played and other things that have happened. And I'll tell you, one of these we'll have to do a session where I'll do a session with you over Skype and record it, and then you can cut the session up. I've done it with other people on the radio and do an actual regression session, because believe me, you were deep under hypnosis. Whether you think you're deep or not, you're there, and the next time you do it, you'll even go deeper, depending on how relaxed you can get there. It's not something you're going to feel a difference in, but the story is going to blow you away then when you come out. Like, where did that come from? And immediately you think, oh, I made it up. That's your conscious mind going, well, I have no knowledge of this. Conscious mind doesn't have a knowledge of anything in your subconscious. It only knows what happened since you were born till now. And even then, it's forgotten a lot of that. So your conscious mind only functions in this reality we're in here. And that's always, the minute you're back in your conscious mind, it's going to trigger well, I must have made that up. I wrote about that in my book, how I felt I made it up but it was, the stories were too revealing. They were too much truth in them that's why I had to investigate the stories then afterwards and see how it had a bearing in my life.
The interesting thing that came out of it for me, the session, was that I realized afterwards that members of the family that I was apparently part of during this session, I met a couple of them again. Like,
oh yeah,
like 20 years ago or something, and I didn't, and actually, they were been part of my life for a while. Then I saw this, and I was like, oh my God, that's who they are.
No kidding. Yeah. I tell people we all come in a soul family. All these we've been through this before. I mean, you and I have known each other for eons. You just, when you run across them, it can be, here I am 62 years old. It's been 62 years and I finally run across somebody else, but it's another soul. We're all connected on a soul level. And now, but you play these different characters. So every time you come in, I tell people it's like Indiana Jones and Han Solo. They're both played by Harrison Ford. But if you asked Harrison, are you Indiana Jones? He'd say no. Are you Han Solo? No. Those are characters I played. He's not even really Harrison Ford. He's a soul playing that too. But that's why we're fascinated with Hollywood, because it's mimicking who we are. We're these souls playing these roles, and that's why I put everything into the character. When they go in, he doesn't want Han Solo to be like Indiana Jones, because who would go see a movie where the character's the same in every play? And I tell people, when you leave this life, after you have played that role, that character's gone. It's gone from our timeline. So that character doesn't exist, but the soul that played him does. And that soul, when it comes back in to play another role, you're not going to recognize that person saying, oh, this is this is Kathy. Oh, no. You're going to recognize, oh, that's that soul. You're going to see this deep connection like you did with these people. But they're different roles now. They might have been your father and mother in the last life, and now they're your sister and brother, or your uncle and aunt, or just friends of yours in this life. Yet it's the same soul. It's the same. It's like Harrison Ford. He was, jumping around in these roles. People would, oh yeah, that's Harrison. But in the movie, when they're actors playing with each other, they got to assume the role. You can't walk up to him like he's Harrison Ford. You got to walk up to him like he is Indiana Jones. And all the characters have to treat him like he's Indiana Jones. And when you're playing a bad guy, you got to be the bad guy. There really aren't. I mean, I know everybody thinks we have all these bad characters, but they're just people that are challenging us in our life. I mean, Hitler was out there and played the worst villain of all, but out of that story came all these stories of connection and love, and thousands and thousands of stories out of World War II that were a direct result of how bad that man was and what he did to drive humanity to get him out of power. But that's the challenge. We challenged ourselves with that story. We challenged ourselves with 9/11. We challenge ourselves every day. No one really died. Yes, the character left the timeline, but the soul still exists out there, and they'll be back. In fact, a lot of them are back already. You see all these stories about somebody who died in 9/11, and then a year later on that same day, somebody was born in that family, and they feel this deep connection, and that we're back and forth. It's like just an ebb and flow of life between these two dimensions. And that's what I discovered as I researched this whole phenomenon and went down all these, regression sessions with Lucy.
Well, I suppose your point there about these dark characters gives us a different way to think about evil. Does it exist? What is it for? Why is it there?
Well, there is evil. I mean, but it's here. And there is hell, but it's here. Hell is right here on earth. We create our own hell. I mean, you don't die and go to hell. That's a Catholic Church teaching of something. You create your hell here. I mean, you can find plenty of people that are stuck in hell, and everyone gets stuck in some version of hell at some point, or purgatory, or places they can't get out of, it seems like. But then once you break free of it, but it's all of our own creating, It's not something that's going to kill you. No matter what happens to you, how bad you're treated in this life, your spirit will survive this. And the people that have those strong spirits, that's why when you see these incredible stories of people that ran into the face of machine gun fire in the war and just charged right through and saved their whole company, or, wiped out a nest of snipers, or whatever the heck was going on in that scenario, they had no fear that they were going to die. They knew that they were impervious, and they walked right through it. And that's what it takes in this life, is not being afraid to roll the dice. Don't be afraid. Know your point. Know that you're there to do something at that moment in time. And you see it happen with these guys on the train the other day, the 2 Americans and a Frenchman, I think, or 3 Americans and a French guy that jumped that one guy. They weren't afraid to react when it came time to do it. You've got to just jump up and go into action when you see this. Don't be afraid. Put everything into the character and respond, and it will turn out the right way. It always turns out the right way. Don't be afraid. That's the thing. Move forward.
In your various investigations into past lives, in your book, one that I found particularly charming was when you travelled to Pontefract.
Oh yeah.
And I mentioned this because it's not that far from here. I live in Yorkshire. And though I'm not English, it's always interesting to see how outsiders view the country. And I mentioned this episode because it's interesting to get your take on the place, and also the past life information you brought back from there. But I was talking to someone the other day who I've never met before. This was just an email conversation, and I happened to mention, because it was related to what we were talking about, that I was going to interview you. And I mentioned Pontefract because she was English, and I thought she might find it interesting. And she said, "Oh, I was born in Pontefract. Not as good as any of your synchronicities, but again, I thought to myself, that's the odds of that are quite remote."
Oh yeah, no, exactly. That was all flowing. It's all flowing in there. And I'll tell you, when I I had no plans to go to England. I wrote about it in my book. I was doing a movie with Madonna and Antonio Banderas called Evita, and we had the promotion for that set. And out of the blue, Stallone's publicist, Paul Block, called and said, look, I need you to go around the world. You're going to start in Japan and then over to France, and then you're going to go up to England. You're going to have one day off in England, and then back over to the and then back to the U.S. all in a week, the whole way around the world in a week. And doing this publicity for this movie called Daylight with Stallone. And I thought, this is unbelievable, because right before that phone call, that's when I had the session where I was in England, and I was in this castle, and I described this place in detail, and then I came home, and these other synchronicities came about of a book that my parents had sent me about my family history, and way back in my grandmother's lineage on my father's side, that we had come from this place in Pontefract, and I didn't know anything about it, but I knew that my answers to what I had seen on the table were there in Pontefract. And so the day off in England, when I had with Stallone there, I had the one day off. I jump on this train and I head north, and I'm asking people on the train, do you know anything about if there is a castle at this Pontefract? Oh, they didn't know anything. And so I got on, switched trains and got out, and there were 2 X's for Pontefract, and I'm listening to my inner self. I'm listening to Kathy's guidance, the energy around me, and saying, okay, no, don't take the first one, take the second one. And I started following this road, and all of a sudden I felt like I was home. I just knew the place. What I had seen, these wide steps, these stone steps that led up to the castle, I had seen those in my visions on the table with Lucy back in West Los Angeles that day. And now here I was in front of me seeing the exact same thing, and I knew that gave me such a solid feeling that I wasn't losing my mind. I was seeing real things, and I went up there, and when you read my book, it was comical, because I was out there, and I remembered the place, what it was like in the 1560s, and of course it had changed a bit. Well, for one thing, the castle was down, but yet I found it without any signs or anything, just found my way to where this place was and the ruins of it. And it was an incredible day. I felt so good at the end of it. I mean, of course, the guy there thought I was crazy because I'm describing what the castle looked like from the 1560s. He's there. He takes me back in the room then and shows me a picture of it, and there it was. I mean, it was so startling to see what I had seen in a session in Lucy's, see it in real life and go, this is it. This is unbelievable.
There's another interesting incident in the book connected with foreseeing a plane crash. That's particularly interesting in itself, because we've been talking about past life, but if we are getting into the metaphysical realms, basically beyond our 5 sense reality, it seems that the future is accessible. You mentioned 9/11. I think of, I can't remember the guy's name, but he's known as the guy who painted 9/11. And quite a long time before 9/11, he did this painting, and it was like, oh my God, that's the Twin Towers on fire. But so past, present, and future, you mentioned earlier about time and space being illusory, but they're here to give structure and shape to this matrix that we're in, basically. But past, present, and future all start to become very nebulous and bleed into one another, and it's almost like everything's in some way exists simultaneously somewhere, like a database,
Oh, yeah. Oh, no. So I say, on the other side, the only place that time and distance and space matter is here on this timeline to us. In reality, if you step off the timeline, you go into regression, you pass away, whatever way you want to get over to this other side, there is no time and space. Everything exists at once, and everything's happening at once. It's hard to wrap your mind around how it can all happen at once, but we immerse ourselves onto this timeline. We jump onto the timeline, and now time starts to play for us in real. We can't go to the past, and we can't go to the future, but we still have subconscious access to it. If you know how to do it, if you let the thing flow, you're going to say something. You're going to let it come out. You're going to be able to forecast the future. Now, to do it with any degree of accuracy, it really requires coming from that feeling spot again. And in that case, when I told about the plane crash, I just felt I felt it come into me. I told what was going to happen, and it happened that night. There was the plane crash exactly the way I said. No one was going to get hurt, and I was trying to show my wife, who I was having this difficulty with, that wasn't understanding me, and she was not understanding how I was doing this, how you can do it. I mean, I just did it the other day. I'm remarried now, and my wife Lisa was going to work, and she was going in, and this was a couple months ago. She didn't go take a jacket with her. Wasn't going to take a jacket. This was back in the spring, and I said, "Well, you ought to take it in case you have to go out. It would be cold." She goes, "Oh no, I won't have to." I said, "Well, you never know. Those fire alarm may go off, and you'll have to go out of the building, right?" And I told her this, and so she said, "Okay." So she takes the jacket with her to work, and she walks into work. And the people, as soon as she walks in the door, the people said, "Oh my gosh, if you'd have been here just a few minutes ago, we all had to leave the building. The smoke alarm, the fire alarms went off, and everyone had to abandon the whole, the whole mall area. They had to leave and go outside and stand in the cold, and it was snowing." This must have actually, it was probably back in the early spring. We had a little cold spell that one day. And so she calls me up immediately. "How did you do it?" I said, "Well, I just felt what I felt is what I said, and then it ends up becoming an event that it was going to come. I was just reading it, feeling it, and so I do that a lot. I do this all the time, and it's just something that once you get in the mode of when something's coming, when you're feeling you got to say something, say it, and watch what happens. You'll be blown away how good you get at it. But it's got to come from that deep. It's not something you think about at all. The thought comes out, the feeling comes out of nowhere, and even the thought just comes into your mind, and it's something you got to say. And it's hard to explain how to do it, but it's not something you intentionally do. It's just something it's going to occur for you on a pretty much regular basis. My mom could do it all the time. She did it to me all the time, and she had no knowledge of anything metaphysical. I mean, she was this. Went to Catholics, the whole Catholic thing too, but yet she would tell me things all the time that turned out to be the truth. A lot of things about my life, and I started to realize that when I started looking back over my life, that's when I realized that's the other thing. Once you start to understand how this works, and you start to go back and look at your life, you realize how it's been happening all along. You were just had the blinders on, you didn't see it.
I don't know if this is a bridge too far, but thinking about some of these ideas we've been discussing around time and space and the nature of past, present and future led me to the notion that all possibilities occur. That is to say, anything that can happen is happening, will happen, has happened, whatever you want to put it.
Well, that's it. Yeah, multi-universe theory, that everything and the decisions we make bend us on which path we're going down. That's why it's hard to forecast something, because how do you know what's going to happen before then if you're going to continue on there or make a change that's going to move you on another path? But that did happen somewhere. That's the whole scientists are really locking in on this multi-universe, that everything that could exist. I mean, and it blows your mind to think about everything. I mean, you can't even wrap your mind around what everything means. That means I'm sitting here with a black shirt on, and in another scene I'm sitting here with a white shirt on, and one I'm not no shirt on, and I'm not. I mean, just every facet of what it could go is out there somewhere. And whether you follow that path or not, but we all as a unity, that energy of us, that's all connected, that we are driving this together, this story. So it does have these twists and turns that are jointly held by all of us, because if you focus your intention on something as a group, it does affect the outcome of things. I mean, that's been proven. They've done studies on that where, people will say prayer, I mean, it doesn't have to be a religious bend to it, but it can just be your thoughts. I mean, really, if we could get the entire world to focus on that things are going to change in this one direction, this place would cease to exist, because we would have elevated ourselves to that point of, well, we have a complete understanding of what we're doing here, that we're really fooling ourselves, But in reality, there is a spiritual growth that comes out of it. There's a growth to your energy, and in the end, that's a growth to all of us. And whether you want to call it God or what label you want to apply to that energy, that is all of us connected.
I don't know if you've seen the work of a guy called Cliff High, but he works in monitoring the internet activity. I'm not sure the details offhand, but the idea is that he notes trends that then suggest what is going to happen. And he seems to have quite a good track record on that. And there's another guy that I interviewed years ago. Sorry, I just don't have his name to hand, but he works on, he's got sensors that are to do with monitoring. It's like random numbers.
Right. I've seen that. I've read about these guys, that have these web bots and these spiders or something that they go out into the web and they gather all this stuff, and then it tells what our consciousness is really doing. And it's extremely incredible because they can forecast market trends and all kinds of stuff from this. They're using this data to manipulate things, or try to anyway.
Well, just a closing thought, Randy. I mean, people might be listening to this and some of them might be thinking or have thought, what would have happened if I'd done that? If only I'd married him, if only I'd married her, if only I'd taken that job, if only I hadn't done this. And maybe you didn't do those things and maybe you did. It's likely that it's just that it's beyond our understanding as we are, experiencing existence now. Yeah.
Well, right. I mean, I tell people you can't go back and on this timeline. So there's a guy who wrote a great book about Eckhart Tolle wrote this book, The Power of Now, and it's about being in the moment, trying to stay in the moment. Don't worry about the future. Don't worry about the past, because the minute you do, that's when pain comes into your life. So when you are able to, I'm putting it in a nutshell, when you're able to shut that all off, stay focused on the moment, that things go better for your life, and you go from moment to moment to moment. And don't put the stress into what's going to happen. I mean, people ask me that, what is happening next? I said, well, I don't really know. I said, I just let it unveil itself, because if I start thinking I can't think my way through life. I just got to feel my way through it the way I've always been, and that is what works out best for me. And so that's my best advice, is to go with your feelings, and don't fret about what you did or didn't do or what you think you can do. Only do what you know you want to do right now.
Randy, today we've been talking about your book, as mentioned earlier, The Key of Life, and various related topics. That's widely available. So I don't know if you want to share details of your website or just anything else you want.
Sure, I can give. My website is I have a couple websites, but Randolph Rogers, RandolphRogers.com will get you to my website, and then there's a connection to the book there that you can go to that website. And the book is called The Key of Life, a Metaphysical Investigation. But if you go to thekeyoflife.net, it's .net for that, you can go right to the book site. But like I said, it's best to go to my website, because there's other stories, and then I'll put up other events, and that's where I'll be posting things like this interview and things like that. People can re-listen to there, and there's other stories too. It's on there that it may fascinate them about other investigations I've worked on and things like that.
And of course, you've done your own interview series as well.
Oh yeah, it's just a lot of. There's a lot more information there for you to go there. And I'm working, like I said, all the people I've done on the book. I have hundreds of hours of recordings that I want to turn into another book about other people's stories, because you don't have to be a movie star. I tell people, you want to see a movie star, look in the mirror every morning. The whole world revolves around you. You've designed a story. Your interaction with other people, or when you play supporting roles, or they play it to you. But the story of life is about you, and go out there and play the biggest role you can when you put everything into that character that you've created.
Excellent. Well, Randy, thank you so much for joining us today on LegalizeFreedom.com.
Well, you're welcome, Greg. It was a pleasure being here.
Well, folks, that's it for another week. As ever, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, check out the website, which is LegalizeFreedom.com. That's legalize-freedom.com, where you'll find an archive of programs offering alternative views on a wide range of topics, including politics and economics, energy and environment, culture, spirituality, history, and the nature of reality. You can also browse and buy a range of publications from our guests, and if you're feeling generous, make a donation to help keep the site up and running. Based on current audience numbers, if everyone who tuned in donated just 5 pence per show, that's about 8 cents US, this could become a full-time, fully funded operation, offering more and more often. During October 2014, over 50,000 of you streamed or downloaded at least one show. Total donations were £7 UK, which currently converts to about $11 US. Whether you listen, donate, or do both, I greatly appreciate your support. Until next time, I'm Greg Moffat, and you've been listening to LegalizeFreedom.com.